Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. Today, I have Gary Hentschel, and Gary's a seasoned operator, and he's in his 60s, and he is still out buying companies, leading teams, and he is taking companies, doubling them, and selling them for the exiting owner. The exiting owner stays part of the business, and he just continues to grow these companies, he and his partners. He's been in banking and staffing and all kinds of other professions, and he's had 4 acquisitions. And the organization or the company that he has now is called the September Group. I wanted to talk to him not only, just how he looks at buying companies, especially when the exiting owner is probably roughly his age. What does he look for? He still has relevance, he still has competence, and he still has a ton of gas in his tank to go out and help these companies that he acquires grow, and then he's going to sell them again. If you're selling your company, you want someone like him because he wants to help take this asset and make it more valuable. So I'm 100% certain that you are going to enjoy my conversation with Gary Hentschel of the September Group. So Gary, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Thank you, Ed. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to do this.
Well, we'll see in 45 minutes whether you feel the same. I know a lot about your background, and that's where I'd like to start, is talking a little bit about, you've been in banking, staffing, you went to tech, and how do you say what you do to somebody that doesn't know you?
It's interesting. I was in banking. That was a long time ago. And I thought that would be a great place to learn. And so I moved from that into the entrepreneurial side. And what we do now is, I've got 2 outstanding partners. They're a lot smarter than I am. And what we do, how I explain it, is we are looking for, opportunities to buy companies that have high growth potential. Typically, and not necessarily what you would want to hear directly, Ed, but typically one-off deals that are referred to us. We have a lot of folks in our network, whether they be attorneys, accountants, bankers, intermediaries, etc. But typically we do much better in what I will call a non-bid environment, a non-auction environment, and getting to know the folks a little bit. And we're looking for owners that are thinking about selling, and they care about the legacy of their business, and they want to sell to someone who's going to continue that, and that there's a lot of growth potential. And then we tend to get more heavily involved. And when I tell people what we do, the partners I have are awesome. Bob Millard is a, high-powered CFO. Dick Dilling's a high-powered entrepreneur. I'm a little bit more on the operational side.
So how did you find your partners? I mean, what made you guys come up with the September Group? And for the listeners that are looking at securing a partner, I'm certain people will want to know, all right, what made this partnership work? Because most, as you know, a lot of them don't.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. And I would say having really good partners is critical and much more important than any individual entrepreneur might think. That, it's like, hey, I can do this. I could not do this without my partners. And I would tell you overall, having partners, period, is huge. I would highly suggest to anyone thinking about doing this kind of stuff, get some partners, get some other talent around you, if at all possible. And it's not the kind of thing you go look for. It kind of just happens. I've known Bob Millard for literally over 40 years. We met as part of an investment club back in the 80s. We were both, young in our careers at that time. And then Dick, I was introduced, by an attorney, kind of happenstance a long time ago, and just developed a friendship with him as well. And then, the opportunities that have come up. But it's been interesting, but I can't tell you, hey, go find this, go find that. We have very, very different views on things.
But you're all friends, right?
Yes.
Or were you friends when you got started or
I would tell you Dick was more of a business associate. Bob was a friend. And then we started working together. So a little bit of both.
how do you solve the inevitable squabbles amongst partners? Or is it just, the majority wins?
Bob and I are very different, and we get much more involved. Bob and I are much more involved in the businesses than Dick. Dick is a super smart guy. He's always on the board. He's very involved and knows everything that's going on. But in terms of day-to-day operations, Bob and I are much more involved, and we absolutely do not agree all the time. Bob is more conservative than I am. Dick is, more of a risk taker than both of us put together, probably. And we just talk through stuff. We've never had to take a vote. We always come to an agreement ultimately. And once we make an agreement, as you need to do, everybody's all in.
I think because of the number of deals that you have done, I believe that there becomes a trust that's just developed as a result of, what this whole thing has seemed to have worked out really well for the three of us.
No question. Yeah, so far so good.
You're not the typical buyer. You're over 60, you're in and you're out doing deals. No, I'm serious about it because I think there's a lot of people that are taking early retirements. I think there's a lot of people that are looking at getting into entrepreneurship or tired of what they're doing. I'm curious to know what these conversations look like when you're showing up at, a business owner that's looking to retire and you're like, man, I have so much gas left in my tank and you don't have any. I mean, what does that conversation look like with those business owners?
That conversation just took place in a particular deal. We were a couple guys, 5, 10 years younger than us are selling. And hey, that's okay. We don't necessarily get into anything along those lines. We're kind of more interested in the deal, and we typically are going to want them to take a role, going forward. So hopefully they've got some gas left in the tank.
It's interesting because I would have thought there would be more put off, like, oh my gosh, this guy's coming in here and gonna buy my company. And me as the seller, it's like, oh my gosh, I should be Gary Hentschel. I should be able to do this. But it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, the conversations when we start out are more personal than business. We've been introduced by someone, like yourself or an attorney. When we start the conversations with these folks, and these days it's virtually always with folks younger, I tend to try to find some common ground because we would need to learn a lot about the business in somewhat more of an intangible or subjective sense. And we're really trying to, not be viewed as, oh, this guy's a buyer, he's a private equity dude that just wants to, we want to just find, hey, we're just regular dudes. We don't really know what we're doing yet on the company. We need to learn a ton because they're like, what do you want to do with this? Well, I'm like, we don't know. We've got to figure it out. Is this got the potential that we're looking for? Is it a good deal for you? Because it's got to be for both. It's got to be a win-win. People talk about that all the time, but it's got to be a win for the buyer and the seller and the employees and the customers. So we try to figure that stuff out early.
What makes them believe you? Others are reading the Harvard Business Review, how to buy a business book, and you're supposed to say this on page 270, but you're different.
What you see is what you get. And one thing we do, we always offer, hey, you want to talk to some of the companies that we bought and sold? You want to talk to the principals and figure out, kind of what we are all about? We'll stand on our reputation at any point. But, as we get to know them, they figure that out for themselves as well, because you got to follow up on stuff. There's so many folks, hey, I'll get back to you on that. And they don't. And we want to move quickly, not necessarily to close, but if there's information exchange, and we're all about a quick no as well. We don't want, if it's not going to work for either party, that's okay. It's business. It's not life or death here. It's just, hey, if this doesn't work, that's no problem. We'll remain friends. And, it's a small town and a small world. So,
yeah, I get you. So with September Group, I read that you're focused on underperforming and underinvested companies, right? So that's kind of what you're targeting. So What are the signals of these businesses that say that there's value here, that we need to take a look? We were just talking that you're looking at hundreds of deals, right? So you've got a ton of deals coming across your table. What makes you say, yeah, maybe we ought to look at this?
Yeah, that's a cool question because there is a lot of stuff that we do look at. And we have a profile on our website that is like everybody else's, companies with 5 to 50 million in revenue, this, and this. But what I really talk about, what I would like to talk about, and my partners as well, hey, man, like a 5 minute conversation, and we can tell you if we're interested or not. And if we're interested, then we'll move pretty quick to see if there's, we want to really get to an IOI or something like that. That doesn't mean hey, we want to buy you. It just means we're interested. But the things to your question that we look at, is it an interesting business? And that's very subjective, I know. But is it something that we think, has some really good growth potential? And there's two factors in that, Ed. One is the company itself, but also very importantly, we look hard at the industry. Is the industry growing? The best way to get exponential growth for a company, in our mind, is increase market share in a growing market. If you can do that, get a bigger piece of a growing pie, that's how you get that very consistent, double digit plus growth. Now, we're all about acquisitions as well to add to that, but you've got to have organic growth, period, to create value in the company, to make it exciting for the employees and so forth. So the kind of things that we are looking for is, first, how are we kind of connecting with the individuals in the company? Is it an interesting company with growth potential? And then, is the industry growing? And all of those things kind of come together and say, yeah, okay, now we want to start getting into a little bit more detail, stuff like margins, stuff like, customer concentrations, all of the normal business stuff. But the first things we really think about is this a company that's got growth potential? Is there a connection? I will also note, I'm going to start rambling again to you, but
No, you're
the,
good.
the management team is a big deal because we don't want to run things day to day. We are, private equity, it'd be aggressive to call us private equity, okay? I mean, we own maybe one or two companies at a time, but we get pretty heavily involved. Now, it's not just a quarterly board meeting or a monthly management meeting with us. Bob and I both will get a little bit deeper into the company, not day to day though. Like, for example, WSI, our company right now, it's an awesome company. I have one direct report, the president. Everybody reports up to him. So we're not going to be involved in a lot of the day to day and everything. We're not going to be the face of the company calling on the customers and so forth. So it's really important, and we figure this out early on, that there's a management team that is capable of running it day to day, and we'll help figure that out as well, but that also wants to grow. They want a piece of the business, kind of that, get a second bite of the apple, because we're going to include them always in equity. Typically we buy, we own 75, 80% of the company, management owns the remainder, and sometimes management gets a check when we buy them, but they want a second bite of the apple. And so that they want to stay in, and they're excited about, working with us to try to double the size of the company in a few years, which is what our focus is.
So the avatars of the people that want to buy the company, have you noticed any consistency? Like somebody that's, 55 to 62 that has the management team in place, or is it the guys that are like, they're 60 plus and they're like, I think this would be a lot of fun and hop on with you?
All of the above, all of the above. Although when you get into the upper age groups, they tend to have a limit on the years that they want you to know that, hey, I would like to stay another 5 years and that's it. I want to stay another 2 years and that's it. Now, with younger management teams, there's none of that kind of stuff. They're not worried about that, nor should they be, nor are we. But if there is, the key guy or gal and or a couple of key folks like this one I just mentioned, they both were like, they have very specific time horizons that they wanted to stay, and they wanted to be out at that point. which is
But
fine.
same as you, and I'm curious to know whether that's your secret sauce. If I'm a seller, and I know that Gary and crew have a shot clock, right? That I'm going to hold this for 5 or 7 years, and our intent is to buy it, build it, sell it. I think that's an easy thing to hop on, knowing that there is a finite, I'm not going to hold it for 15 years. I'm going to hold it for 5 or 7 years. I think people can see whether or not you've got the chops to get that job done. You know what I mean? Maybe
Sure.
that's it.
Yeah, that in that
Interesting.
conversation, Ed, is always interesting because, I mean, people do their research when they talk to us and they know what we're all about and kind of how we do things. But we are very direct. We are going to sell the company, okay, at some point. But there is no time horizon. A lot of private equity folks and financial buyers in general do have a very specific time horizon. And part of that's because they're using other people's capital. We just use our own capital. So we don't have a time horizon. We always say, hey, we want to build a great company. Good things will happen. What's the time horizon going to be when we sell? We don't know yet. 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. That's going to be up to how well the company develops, how the value is created, and when it gets to a point where we're getting a lot of interest and people are coming to us. We don't want to have to go out searching. And that's one of the questions we also ask ourselves before we buy a company. Who are we going to sell it to? Even though it may be 5 to 10 years out, we try to figure that out a little bit. Not necessarily a specific company that would buy it, but we want to make sure we kind of know what we're aiming at and who the potential buyers might be whenever that time may come.
No, and that makes sense. I mean, you always start with the end in mind and work backwards, especially in something like that where you're not going to hold forever.
Yeah.
So I can see that.
Yeah, and your point's well taken, though. It is a lot easier for buyers to buy in when they're going to participate, knowing, yeah, there's a time horizon out there, but these guys just want to, it's not short. It's not a couple of years. They want to build this thing, do it right, and then we'll see what happens.
So on value, when you're looking at these sellers, where are the mistakes that the sellers are making on value? Our challenge is always getting a seller to see their business through the buyer's eyes. And so I'm curious to know what you're seeing as far as sellers and the mistakes that they're making as it relates to their value.
That's a tough question to answer because we tend to be very transparent on how we are valuing the company. And that may differ from the seller. And if that's the case and we're way off, which has happened recently on a deal that I shared with you, that's okay. Ultimately it's up to the seller as to what price that they want to sell at. And we're okay. We're not feeling like we are always right. And just because our value may be substantially lower, I don't necessarily take the opinion, you're wrong, we're right, and you're not going to be able to get that. It's more along the lines, hey, let's keep in touch. We've got a different view, and, to get to that type of value, some other things might have to happen. Maybe that will come back to us. But to answer your question specifically, though, the more experienced sellers that maybe have been, they're usually not really far off from us, but someone who has not been in the market before, that they've maybe talked to some folks that said, hey, this, the multiples are 8 to 10 EBITDA, but maybe that's not their industry and maybe that's not the size of their company. If they were $100 million, yeah, maybe it's eight, but you're $20 million and that multiple is more like five. Those type of things might be how they're getting a little bit of an inflated value, at least relative to how we look at it.
And as you look at it, has your perception of risk changed? There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And, I can tell you on the sell side, there's a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines just trying to, just hanging loose to see what the tariffs look like, what's going to happen with interest rates, inflation, pick whatever uncertainty you like. So has your risk changed? Because this is acquisition. What number acquisition are
This
you
would
on
be
now?
four. And I would tell you the answer to that is no. Our perception of risk has not necessarily changed. We capitalize and structure our deals relatively conservatively and to insulate ourselves versus risk because we have had all kinds of stuff happen, like, buying a company and then finding out 6 months later, the largest client is leaving and you got a big decrease in sales, you got to recover. And so when I say structure our deals, we do not over leverage. We put in a bunch of capital. We've got great banking relationships. We're very fortunate, and we structure debt facilities where we put a lot of it of the acquisition money on a term basis, an amortizing basis, because we feel that's kind of like buying a fixed asset type of thing. You want to amortize it and get rid of that, but then we build a large line of credit that very little is tapped to make the acquisition. We want a lot of dry powder, A, to make acquisitions without having to check with too many people, and B, in case things don't go well, we've got some backstop there and some, extra cash that we'll be able to tap into. But my one partner, he's super smart. He sees a lot of deals and says, "Man, hey, I like it. I like this one. I like that one." And Bob, on the other hand, much more conservative, and he tends to be a little bit more cautious. I'm in the middle, and that works out really well to develop the perception of risk on the deal. But if we like the company, I would say our risk parameters haven't changed. There's certain industries, that we're just not going to get into just because there's too many people out there, like CNC machining companies, things like that. There's just too many of them, too much competition. It feels kind of commoditized. We'll stay away from that. And it's not necessarily from a risk perspective, but
So my next question, and by the way, I think there was a seed there because I think that the way you buy it, your intent is that you need growth capital too. I think that for what you plan, you can't overbuy because then you're just servicing debt and not growing the company.
one other thing I'll mention on that, Ed, virtually always we build in an earnout, not for long periods. That doesn't really make sense, but 2 years max, sometimes only 1 year. But, we want to ensure that the owner, who may or may not be sticking around, continues to have a vested interest in how we're doing. And, smaller, more entrepreneurial companies, as you know, there may be customer relationships that are relatively tight with that ownership. And if that ownership is leaving, those could be at risk. We want to make sure those are transitioned properly and that whoever is responsible for those has a vested interest in making sure they continue. And that also kind of decreases the leverage on the deal, so to speak, both when you're negotiating bank debt, but also just in terms of the overall capital structure.
And I think it's a hat tip to you guys when people are willing to do that because a lot of sellers, they just don't. And that's a reflection of how they feel about the likelihood of getting that money. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And we see that on both sides, when we're buying, but also when we're selling. And, when we're selling, if it's reasonable, the market drives that as much as what we think is reasonable or not. If we've got, two similar offers and one doesn't require an earnout and one does, everything else is the same. We'll go to the one that doesn't require an earnout because the old line that you've heard a million times is, hey, we're not in control anymore. So, whether that earnout is hit, we can't determine. We'd rather not, but we have and we will. And we always, it depends on the deal, but every deal we've done, there has been some level of earnout.
And again, it's back to part of the reason that you move fast as you develop that relationship, and that earnout or that contingent financing is not that big of a deal anymore because you're really buying into the September group and what you guys are going to do more so
Sure.
than I
Yeah.
need to extract all the value and move down the road.
And the management team is staying typically. So they know that there's continuity there. We're not coming in and changing the world there.
Does the sellers put stay bonuses, any kind of payment for the management team to stay? Have you experienced that or no?
Typically the stay bonus is more with the buyer. If you are going to structure things along those times, what you see more often from a seller may be some sort of a transaction bonus. They are trying to ensure that their folks remain through the time the deal is done because typically they have shared with the management team that, hey, we're looking at selling the company, et cetera. Not with all the employees, but their top leadership team, so to speak. And so there's something in place for them, but the The stay bonuses are the responsibility of the buyer and how you structure those. And they're typically, I would tell you from our perspective, they're not stay bonuses. We're giving them equity. That's the stay bonus, so to speak.
I get it. Well, I was referring to the managerial team, not necessarily the exiting owner. Or are you saying both?
The managerial team.
Okay.
They are getting oftentimes from the owner a transaction bonus
Right.
when a deal
Yeah.
closes because they've been told a year before, hey, we're for sale. I need you to stay for me to maximize the value. When we sell, you are going to get X. And that comes out of their proceeds, so to speak. So we're not involved in that. So I guess that's a state bonus for them, but that comes from the seller. We don't get involved in that.
Well, I'll tell you, we've been hearing some horror stories about that where the ownership is telling the leadership team that, yeah, we're exploring an exit. And so the managerial team, they just assume that, oh my gosh, we're going to be without a job. It's going to be some sort of private equity group. They're going to bring in their own team. So they become flight risk. And in the case I'm referring to, they did. And the value eroded really fast. And again, I think that's an isolated case. I think it's a reflection of how you've run your company.
And another way of looking at it, those folks in a deal that we would do, for example, they're all going to be equity holders. And so there's a vested interest for them to stay regardless because they will not cash out of that equity until the company is sold. When we're on the selling side, we've got a built-in stay bonus, so to speak, with the top leadership because we'll extend equity relatively deep into our companies. Not, I wouldn't say 10 people deep, but, for a 50 employee company, there's, six that have equity in the company.
So of the deals that you've done, is there a common theme? Because I mean, you started in staffing and now you're in tech. And by the way, I don't see you as the tech guy, but
Is it how I look?
no, not how you look, just how you use your phone.
You know me, we know each other. I'm not a tech guy. I can't even turn on a phone, man. At times, my tech advisors are my wonderful wife and my wonderful kids, and now even extending to my grandkids, But the business elements are the same, but it's about people always and how you treat them and all that kind of stuff. I would tell you the common thread in all of the businesses is that we have been very fortunate to have the teams embrace a couple of things. One is an overused phrase, growth mindset. These are teams that are like, they buy in, hey, we're going to grow. That's what I tell people day one is there's every conversation you have with me for the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to hear a word, it's grow. And that's going to be part of it. That's the culture. And so they buy into that and they buy into, this is another overused phrase, but how we do things is servant leadership. And this is not the green leaf religious thing that you wear on your sleeve. It's just very simple. We work for you. You don't work for us. We work for you. We are going to try to figure out, help you, make this company grow. And, what resources do you need? What can we do for you? And that needs to permeate throughout the organization. And so the common element to your question has been very fortunate that teams that have bought into that, general growth mindset and being aggressive and having energy. And then the other side just being, hey, we're a team, we work for you. I mean, when I get introduced, with the president, with Jim Halsmer of WSI, I introduce him as my boss. I say, this is my boss, Jim Halsmer. He's the president of WSI. And I mean it. I don't tell him what to do. I just try to help him get done what he needs to get done. And we do that. That's kind of the whole flow. So
I can see that. So let's just walk through your next acquisition. So you buy it. What does the first 60 days look like? All the wires are out. Now what happens?
we don't come in and change things. And the first 6 months, and any company we've bought will tell you exactly this. We just try to figure out the company, get to know the folks, get to know the product, get to know the industry, and all of the above. And really, we don't start trying to figure out specific initiatives, business planning. There's a lot of stuff that we are going to do. You know, performance development is huge for us and how we go about it. We ultimately we'll be putting in stuff in place we call like the 9 block, and rating everyone based on their performance and their potential and all of these kind of things, and having formal development reviews and all of that. That's going to come, but we don't start that right away. In terms of the actual business planning and initiatives, are we going to add to this product line? Are we going to emphasize a different product line? Are we going to expand geographically? Are we going to add salespeople? All of that kind of stuff. None of that in the first 6 months until we figure out just what's going on to get to know the company. So there is no first 60 days we do this, this, and this. We'll have a meeting with all the employees day one. That's probably the only definitive thing. And then we take it from there. And we're going to be scheduling one-on-ones with folks and just get to know them. Let them get to know us, because a lot of times it's like, oh man, who are these guys? Most employees had no idea the company was going to sell, and all of a sudden, in one 24-hour period, they get announced by the ownership, we sold the company, and then here they are, Bob and Dick and I, typically on a Zoom call, three old dudes, on the screen, and then saying, "Hey, nice to meet you guys. Looking forward to working with you. We'll be in touch, and we're gonna start scheduling some time. We just want to get to know you. No changes for now. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job, or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have bought the company if we didn't think it was a great company."
One of the things that I ask every guest is that if there was one thing that you could share that would help an owner or a buyer or an advisor that would have an immediate impact on the business that they're advising, selling, or buying, what would you say is that one key ingredient?
We see a lot of advisors that attempt to be advisors to us, maybe, and or to potentially buyers that we are talking to, or sellers for that matter. There's a strong focus on trying to be the smartest guy in the room, which is not a way to develop a relationship and be able to learn about each other. That becomes the critical part when one thing I learned a ton of stuff from my dad, but one of the things he told me is, when you're calling on people, like in banking for sales, or whether it's now and you're trying to find potential clients to sell their business, et cetera, you want to try to call at as high a level of the company as possible, the president and the CEO, because he said typically they're good guys or gals, because you don't get to that position typically. Now, there's exceptions to this, as we all know, but you typically don't get to that position by being a jerk. And so you deal with folks that will be able to be honest and tell you not just, hey, what's great about the company, but what's wrong with the company too. And you want to be able to do that in an environment where everybody's kind of learning, from that, because then you can say, hey, have you thought about this? There's opportunities, and then people get excited with new information. Anybody who thinks they know everything, it's a tough one, I think, and so I guess it's people listening that is one of the traits that I have noticed that is the best.
Now, interesting that you say that, because I didn't think about that until you said it, but I could see that as your superpower, because you normally come in any situation that I've known you from a posture of asking questions and trying to learn. I get that. And I could totally see why that resonates with, especially the sellers that you're interacting with.
Most sellers, they're almost like it's us versus them, right? Okay, you're a buyer. You're trying to drive down the price. I'm a seller. I'm trying to drive up the price. So I've got to prove to you that I know more than you do, and that this company is worth more than what you think it is, which is not the case. We always want to pay a fair price, and we're not going to get it if we don't, because we've never bought a company where there hasn't been somebody else talking to them. You don't, that doesn't happen. So, the market will help dictate the price ultimately. And if it's early stage discussions, which we love, by the way, to, just start, bouncing some things around, and they may have an idea it's worth a lot more. And we'll say, hey, here's why we're kind of thinking this, talk it through. And then we leave. But then maybe a year later, they call back and say, hey, you know what? We kind of like what you guys had to say. We'd like to talk some more. That's huge in your business and ours, so to speak, to have folks that you've talked to and they come back, whether could be a month, could be a year when they come back, but they've got to have this We want to have a partnership mentality because if we win, you win, and vice versa. The biggest thing we can do is have advocates of the companies that we have owned and sold, which we do. We can say, hey, talk to these guys, and you can ask them anything you want. Were we fair? Did we do what we say we were going to do? That's a big one for us. Do what you say you're going to do, period. If that's all there is to it. I've told my kids that a million times. If you do that, you're ahead of 90% of the business world day one. Hey, hold on first. One question for you, Ed.
Sure.
So, how do you see the market right now? I mean, we are seeing a lot of opportunities. The economy seems to be doing pretty well. Nobody really knows about interest rates, what might happen or not. Markets seem to be fairly strong. IPO market seems to be coming on. In the world that you and the September Group deals in, companies, what I would call lower to middle market businesses. How do you see the market as what I would define as the M&A market,
Yeah.
companies looking to sell and people or companies looking to buy?
As long as time doesn't stop, there's going to be deal flow. And the question is, from a value standpoint, I think people are starting to realize that, you know what, maybe the fervor of the last few years is maybe dying down a little bit. The private equity groups that were paying exorbitant multiples are now pumping the brakes a little bit on, do I really want that deal kind of thing. So certainly we're having probably more conversations than we have in a number of years. But the sales cycle is long. I mean, it takes 6 months to a year to prep it and get it ready to go. It takes 6 months to a year to sell it, and it takes 6 months plus to get your integration. And I think people have adopted that. They recognize that it's going to take some time and we need to start having more conversations. So, to your question, we're having more conversations, which will suggest that 26 and probably into 27 will be really, really active.
One thing I would add to that, Ed, that we are seeing that is maybe a little bit new, depending on the company, but we are seeing that due diligence is far more extensive and deeper than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, particularly from private equity companies. There is a substantially deeper level of digging into the financial statements, into customer data, industry data, but anything and everything. It's much more extensive now than what we experienced, and whether we are competing for a deal or looking at deals. And I would tell you generally that will hold true of us. And I think part of that we tend to dig pretty deep. We tend to move much faster than other private equity companies, other financial buyers, I'll put it that way, and certainly strategic buyers. We move faster, but I would also say we've learned a lot. That's why, we're going deep. We've learned some things from the past where, gosh, if we had asked these questions, we would have had a little bit easier time, with this situation. And so, but that's just another element in the marketplace. To your point, that deals seem to take a long time. I don't accept that as okay. We move as fast as the other party will, whether it's a seller or buyer. We are never going to be the holdup. We move fast. We have resources. We know what we're doing, and there's no wizard behind the curtain. It's Bob and Dick and I. We're going to make the decisions. We'll make them quickly. But we have seen on the other side of the equation now a lot of just deep due diligence and a lot of reviews, and it just takes forever. To your point, a year to get ready, a year to close. Integration, that's always unique to the transaction. But thanks for the answer to that, though. That's good to know.
How do they find the September Group? Where are you and how do people engage with you?
We have been low profile and under the radar, and that's been somewhat conscious because, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of our opportunities come from our network, and we reach out to that on a periodic basis and just say, hey, here's what we're doing. And this will sound weird and not that, sexy, so to speak, but we've got a mailing list, probably 125 folks are on there, 90% of which, Ed, these are folks that Intermediaries. There's a lot of attorneys on there. We find attorneys are great because typically their clients will talk to them maybe first about anything they're thinking about selling. Accountants are good, bankers are good, intermediaries are great, but that's typically going to be a deal that's being shopped. So we don't do as well, but we still absolutely want to look at them and maybe throw our hat in the ring on a deal like that. But we reach out and find those opportunities. But now we are looking for opportunities right now. Our current portfolio companies doing outstandingly well. Quite honestly, they don't need us. They're rocking. And so we're out looking. And so we will have a website. By the time anybody sees this, there'll be a website, theseptembergroup.com, that will have all the information you need. There'll be a button on there to contact us directly. And also I ask is, like I said, 5-minute conversation. Literally, that's it. And we can tell you if that's something we would be interested in. And if we're not interested, a lot of times we try, and it's like, hey, we're not, but we know a lot of people. Have you tried Ed Meisegland? Or there's some other folks that might be able to help. It's not us, but that we're all about that. We're all a community, right? And so we are very much into sharing opportunities and making sure anybody we talk to succeeds. That's only good for everybody. And so we're always trying to refer things as much as we can and get referrals as well. But so as always, an incredibly long answer to your question. The answer is theseptembergroup.com.
All your contact information from LinkedIn to theseptembergroup.com. It'll all be in the show notes and on the website. So we'll get them to you. Just know how much I appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, we'll stay in touch. All right.
All right.
We'll talk soon, man.
Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.